Welcome to the Workplace Minute, powered by H3HR Advisors and sponsored by WorkHuman. Thanks for joining me for a quick update on what's important in the world of work. My name is Steve Boese. Today in the Workplace Minute, we're going to revisit one of the most politically charged labor stories of the last 2 years. California's decision to raise the minimum wage for many fast food workers to $20 an hour beginning April 1st, 2024. And here's the quick version up front. Despite all the warnings, all the doom and gloom headlines, and all the confident predictions that this would crush the industry, the best recent public evidence does not show widespread job loss, does not show a collapse in the number of fast food locations, and does not show the kind of massive menu price shock that its opponents said was inevitable. What it does show is that pay went up meaningfully for a large, low-wage workforce, while the broader economic effects appear to have been much more modest and more mixed than its critics claimed. Let's break it down. So to understand how California got here, you have to go back before AB 1228. That's the 2023 law that set the $20 per hour wage floor. The real starting point is before that, with the Fast Recovery Act signed in 2022. That earlier law was sponsored by Assemblymember Chris Holden and was designed to create a fast food council that could set wages and working standards in a notoriously low-wage, high-turnover part of the labor market. Now, support for that effort came from fast food workers, CIU California, and labor advocates who argued that the industry's business model had long depended on low pay, unstable schedules, and weak worker voice. Opponents, including restaurant and franchise groups, argued that the law unfairly targeted just one industry, would function like a type of a food tax, and would force operators to raise prices, cut jobs, and even shut down locations. Then the politics got more complicated. AB 257 triggered a referendum fight, and that fight eventually produced a compromise. In September of 2023, labor groups and the fast food industry announced a deal. The legislature approved it on September 14th, and Governor Gavin Newsom signed AB 1228 on September 28th, and the referendum was later withdrawn. The new law created a revised fast food council and set the $20 per hour minimum wage for covered fast food workers starting April 1st of 2024, with future increases capped by inflation or 3.5%, whichever is lower. So in practical terms, California moved from a huge political battle over whether the sector should be treated differently to a real live, real world test of what would happen if the state actually imposed this new minimum wage. And when the law started to hit in the real world, the early public conversation followed a familiar script. Supporters framed it as an overdue recognition that fast food work is real work and that hundreds of thousands of these workers are actually adults supporting families, and they're not just teenagers trying to earn some pocket money. Opponents said that fast food operators would have no choice but to raise prices, stop hiring, reduce worker hours, embrace more automation, or even close locations. So all that is what makes this case really useful. It gives us an actual policy and an actual labor market with real data to evaluate rather than just speculate on theories and repeat talking points. So what does the evidence say about wages? Well, on this point, the answer is pretty clear. Wages rose materially. A Harvard Shift Project brief found that immediately after the law took effect, hourly wages for California fast food workers increased by at least $2.50 an hour, and the share of workers earning less than $20 an hour fell by about 60 percentage points. And a Berkeley working paper using Glassdoor and payroll-linked data found pay increased about 10% 2 quarters after the implementation from a baseline of $16.68, while quarterly earnings data suggested weekly earnings rose about 8.5%, roughly $45, with the researchers estimated the effect for covered workers at about just under 12%. So if anyone says the wage law did not meaningfully change workers' pay, that is just not what the data shows. So what about jobs? Which was the biggest, probably single warning from critics of the law. Here's where the debate can be more contested and also perhaps more interesting. A 2025 NBER paper by economists Jeffrey Clemens, Olivia Edwards, and Jonathan Meir estimated that California fast food employment declined by 2.5% to about 3% relative to the counterfactual, right, where the law wasn't passed, which they translated into roughly 18,000 fewer jobs. That study is part of the public record. It should not be ignored. But Berkeley's 2025 analysis of the data found employment effects ranging from about negative 0.6% to negative 1.2% in some areas and near zero in others, with the overall results statistically indistinguishable from zero, so no effect. Their broader conclusion was a null employment effect, and their April 2026 update, using establishment-level worker presence data across restaurants, again concluded there was no evidence of negative employment effects. So the honest summary is not that every economist agrees, but it is telling that the strongest recent policy studies do not find widespread job destruction, and even the negative estimates are nowhere near the kind of industry collapse that many opponents of the law predicted. So what about prices? Well, on prices, the evidence cuts against the most dramatic claims. Berkeley's paper found that fast food prices rose more sharply right after the law, but 2 quarters later, the average estimated increase settled to about 2.1%, with combo meals up 1.5% and specialty burgers about 1%. And their latest 2026 release summarized that effect in consumer terms as about 6 cents on a $4 meal. That matters because it suggests the price effect was real but very modest. In other words, yes, some labor costs were passed on to customers. That's not surprising. But the evidence does not support the idea that the new law created some kind of fast food affordability meltdown, at least all by itself. So what about the overall health of the industry? Again, you can always find anecdotes about specific chains or struggling locations, and some operators did say that the new wage floor was quite painful. But anecdotes are not the same as industry-wide evidence. California's limited service restaurant sector still employed about 740,000 workers on a seasonally adjusted basis in January 2026, according to the BLS. And Berkeley's latest update says the policy significantly increased pay, produced modest price increases, and did not reduce employment. And a separate worker-focused Harvard shift brief also found no evidence that employers broadly offset higher wages by cutting hours, benefits, or scheduling quality right after the implementation. So the larger picture is not an industry in freefall. It's an industry that absorbed a pretty major wage increase with much less disruption than many critics had forecast. So that brings me to the part of the story which I think matters the most. We still hear people say that fast food jobs are not supposed to be living wage jobs, as if that settles an issue like this. But that idea falls apart the moment you actually look at who does this work. AP's reporting on the law noted that many of the more than 500,000 people employed in California fast food jobs are adults who are supporting families. These are not abstract labor inputs. These are people trying to pay rent, buy groceries, cover their transportation, and hold their lives together in one of the most expensive states in the country. The idea that people who are making food, serving customers, cleaning stores, and keeping a pretty big industry running somehow don't deserve wages compatible with basic dignity is not an economic argument. That's a value judgment, and it's one I reject. Every kind of honest work has dignity. Every job that creates value, serves customers, and keeps businesses operating has value. Fast food work's not lesser work. It's not practice work. It's not disposable work. And when adults, including parents, depend on those jobs, then the question of wages is not some abstract economic debate. It's a question about what kind of labor market are we willing to accept and what kind of respect we're willing to extend to the people who are inside it. The final lesson here I'll share is a broader one. Public policy arguments, especially around wages, are often dominated by ideology, anecdotes, and fear. But the right response is to look at the evidence as it develops, not just the predictions people made before the fact. In California's case, the data so far suggests that raising pay for fast food workers produced substantial wage gains, modest price effects, and no clear evidence of widespread employment collapse. There's still a debate and more research will come, but if we're serious about assessing labor policies honestly, then we have to trust the data more than our dogma. And right now, the data look a lot better for this policy than the critics said they would. That's it for the show today, and a big thank you to WorkHuman for supporting the Workplace Minute. Be sure to subscribe to the HR Happy Hour Network on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Steve Boese, and this has been the Workplace Minute from H3 HR Advisors.